The response from the Galactic Collective came 2 weeks after the story went viral. 3 officials arrived at the apartment building in a sleek transport vehicle that drew stares from everyone on the street. They were Korathi, a species known throughout the galaxy for their role in administrative governance. Tall and gray-skinned with expressions that seemed permanently fixed and neutral. Disapproval Jihei met them in the building's common room alongside Jinho the lawyer and Soyan the journalist. The officials had requested a formal meeting to address what they called the incident involving a regular emergency response. "We have reviewed the case," the lead official said, their translator producing words in a flat mechanical tone. "And we have determined that all protocols were followed correctly according to established guidelines." Jihei felt her jaw tighten, but kept her voice steady. 7 beings almost died, she said. A child stopped breathing while your protocols were being followed correctly. Survival statistics indicate that Vellani have a significant buffer period under suboptimal atmospheric conditions, the official replied. The response time fell within acceptable parameters for non-critical situations. Jinho leaned forward in his chair. Those parameters were set without input from the species they affect, he said. Vellani representatives were never consulted when these guidelines were established. The official blinked slowly, a gesture that might have indicated surprise or might have meant nothing at all. Minor species do not have sufficient representation in the administrative councils to participate in guideline development. They said, "This is a matter of practical resource allocation." "Then the system is broken," Soin said. "And we have documented evidence that this broken system has cost lives across 3 continents." She pulled out her tablet and displayed a compilation of cases, testimonies, and statistics that she and her team had gathered over the past 2 weeks. The officials examined the data with expressions that remained frustratingly neutral. "We acknowledge that there have been incidents," the lead official finally said. "But systemic reform requires extensive review and cannot be implemented based on emotional responses to isolated events." "These are not isolated events," Jihei said, standing up. "These are patterns of neglect that your organization has ignored because the victims are too small to matter politically." The official turned their gray eyes toward her. "You are a medical professional," they said. "You understand triage, yes. The allocation of limited resources based on likelihood of survival and potential contribution." "I understand triage," Jihei replied. "I also understand that triage is for emergencies when there are genuinely not enough resources. Not for everyday situations where help exists, but is simply not sent." The meeting ended without resolution. The officials promised to submit a report to their superiors and departed in their sleek transport, leaving behind nothing but frustration and the faint smell of bureaucratic indifference. But something else happened that day that the officials did not see in the hallway outside the common room. A small crowd had gathered, humans and aliens from the building, drawn by word of the meeting, watching through windows and listening at doors when the officials left. They did not disperse. Instead, they came together in the common room and began to talk. A Korthani family from the 5th floor shared their story of waiting 18 hours for medical help after a kitchen fire. A human couple described how they had sheltered a group of Vest travelers in their apartment when the orbital station refused to process their emergency landing request. A young Vellani from another creche spoke about losing an elder to delayed response during a previous atmospheric failure. Story after story emerged, each one a thread in a larger pattern that had been invisible until now. Jihei listened and took notes and felt the cold anger in her chest transform into something warmer, something like purpose. That evening, Kethri found her on the rooftop of the building, staring out at the city lights. "The officials will not change anything," the small Vellani said. I have seen their kind before on other worlds. Maybe not, Jihei agreed. But they are not the only ones who can make changes. She turned to look at Kethri, and she saw that several other Velani had followed, including Mothven and Suli. I have been thinking about what Mothven said, Jihei continued, about humans being those who hold strangers in the dark. It is spreading, Kethri said. The phrase, it has reached Velani communities on 7 worlds now, and other species have begun using it too. Jihei nodded slowly. What if we made it more than just a phrase? She said. What if we created something real? A network of humans and aliens who agree to help each other regardless of what the official systems say. Mothven moved closer, their elderly body glowing with soft, steady light. Such networks exist in the galaxy, the elder said. They are usually suppressed by larger powers who see them as threats to established order. Earth is different, Jihei said. Humans have a long history of building communities outside official structures, and we are stubborn about protecting things we believe in. Suli climbed up onto the rooftop railing, their small form silhouetted against the city glow. Would other humans join? The child asked. Would they help strangers who are not their own kind? Jihei thought about the crowd in the common room, the stories that had been shared, the anger and compassion she had seen in human faces when they learned how the galaxy treated its smaller members. Yes, she said. I think many of them would. The next morning, Jihei created a simple message and posted it on every human network she could access. The message described what had happened to the Velani Crescent, explained how galactic emergency systems failed minor species, and it asked a single question: if your neighbor knocked on your door at midnight and needed help, would you answer? The responses came faster than she could read them. Thousands of humans from dozens of countries saying yes, saying they had already helped aliens in their communities, saying they were ready to do more within a week. The network had a name: Midnight Knock. It had coordinators in 12 cities. It had translation volunteers and medical professionals, and lawyers and journalists all working together, and it had something that the Galactic Collective had never anticipated. It had humans who simply refused to accept that some lives mattered less than others. Kithri became one of the first alien liaisons, traveling between Velani communities and human organizers, explaining needs and building bridges. Mothven advised on galactic politics, warning when official attention might become dangerous, and Suli, the child who had been saved by human warmth, became an unexpected symbolic reminder that the smallest and most vulnerable were exactly the ones who needed protection. Jia returned to work at the hospital, but her life had changed in ways she was still trying to understand. She no longer felt like she was just surviving between shifts. She felt like she was part of something larger, something that might actually make a difference in how the galaxy treated its forgotten members. The officials from the Galactic Collective returned once more, this time with warnings about unauthorized assistance, networks, and interference with established protocols. Jia met them at the door of her building and told them that she understood their concerns. Then, she closed the door in their faces and went back to work, because some things were more important than protocols. Some things were more important than approval from powers that had already proven they did not care. And somewhere in the galaxy, the phrase continued to spread: those who hold strangers in the dark, humans, the ones who answered when no one else would. The cold air from outside swept through the apartment like a cleansing wave. Jia positioned herself near the nest, watching the Velani carefully for any sign that the Earth atmosphere was making things worse instead of better. For several long minutes, nothing changed. Then Mothven, the eldest, took a deeper breath. The whistling sound of their respiration grew stronger, steadier, and a faint glow began to return to their thin body. "It is helping," Kethri said. Their translator voice, carrying something that sounded almost like hope, Jihai nodded but kept her focus on the others, one by one. The adult Vellani began to stir. Their bioluminescence flickered back to life, casting shifting patterns of blue and green light across the moss-covered walls. But Sulai, the smallest one, remained still. Jihai moved closer to the tiny creature, studying them with the same clinical attention she would give any patient. The child was barely larger than her hand, their body almost translucent, and she could see the faint outlines of internal structures through their skin. No glow came from within, no movement indicated breathing. "How long has Suli been like this?" Jay asked. "Since before I came to your door," Kethri replied. "The young ones are more sensitive to bad air." And Suli stopped responding when the carbon dioxide levels first started rising. Jihai thought about everything she knew about metabolism and shock, and the way bodies shut down to protect themselves in humans. Hypothermia could cause a similar stillness, a slowing of all systems to preserve core function. Perhaps Vellani children had a similar response. "What do young Vellani need when they are in distress?" she asked. "Besides clean air." Kethri consulted with Mothven in their whistling language before answering through the translator. "Warmth and contact," they said. "When our young are stressed, they need to feel the energy of their family, the heat of bodies close together, the rhythm of life around them." "You said bioluminescent energy transfer," Jihai recalled from their earlier conversation. "I cannot do that." "No," Kethri agreed. "Humans do not produce the right kind of light." Jihai looked at Suli again. Then at her own hands she thought about the babies she had seen in the hospital. The premature ones kept alive by warmth and touch when technology alone was not enough. Skin-to-skin contact, kangaroo care, the simple power of one body sharing heat with another. "I want to try something," she said. "But you need to tell me if it could hurt them." She explained her idea, and Kethri translated for the others. A rapid conversation in whistles and clicks filled the room. And finally Mothven raised their head and spoke directly to Jihai. For the first time, the translator rendered their words slowly, as if struggling with concepts that did not translate well. "We do not know if human warmth will help," Mothven said. "Your bodies run hotter than ours, and your heartbeat is slower. But you are offering what we cannot give right now, and we are too weak to refuse." That was enough permission for Jihish reached into the nest and gently lifted Suli with both hands. The tiny Vellani weighed almost nothing. Like holding a small bird made of cool glass, no response came from the child, no flutter of awareness. Nothing. Jihai settled into a sitting position against the wall and cradled Suli against her chest. Just above her heart, she pulled her jacket around them both, creating a warm pocket of air. And she waited. The other Vellani watched her with expressions she could not read. Their large dark eyes reflected the soft glow of their own bodies. And none of them spoke. Minutes passed. Jihai focused on keeping her breathing steady and her body relaxed. She thought about all the night shifts she had worked, all the patients she had held in moments of crisis, all the times human touch had made a difference when medicine alone could not. She felt the first change before she saw a slight warmth where there had been none, a subtle shift in the weight against her chest. Then a faint light began to pulse beneath Suli's translucent skin, flickering in time with Jihai's heartbeat. "Look," Kethri whispered. Moving closer, the glow grew stronger, spreading from the child's core outward to their limbs. Suli stirred, their tiny appendages curling and uncurling as if testing whether they still worked. A soft whistling sound emerged from somewhere inside them, a breath being taken after too long without. Jia held perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell was working. Suli's eyes opened, dark and deep like pools of ink, and they looked up at Jihai with something that might have been confusion or curiosity or both. Then the child made a sound that the translator picked up and converted to words. Warm, safe mother. Jihei felt tears prick at her eyes. Sudden and unexpected, she had spent years building walls around her heart, telling herself that professional distance was necessary for survival, that caring too much would only lead to pain. Now a creature from another world had just named her with a word that meant protection and comfort and love. You are not their mother, Kethri said gently. But they feel what you are doing for them, and in our language, that is what the word means. Jihei did not trust herself to speak. She simply held Suli closer and let her body heat continue to do its work as the hours crept toward dawn. The apartment slowly returned to something like normal. The other Villani recovered enough to move around, checking on equipment and each other. Kethri brought Jihei water and something that looked like fruit, but tasted like nothing she had ever experienced. Through it all, she kept Suli against her chest, unwilling to let go until she was certain the child would be all right. At 6 in the morning, a chime sounded at the door. A Galactic Collective technician arrived. A tall being from a species Jihei did not recognize, carrying tools and wearing an expression of bored indifference. They glanced at the room, at the open windows, at the human woman holding a Villani child, and said nothing about any of it. Within 15 minutes, the atmospheric regulator was repaired. The technician ran a diagnostic, declared everything functional, and prepared to leave. The response time for this call was unacceptable, Jihei said, standing up carefully with Suli still in her arms. 7 beings almost died. The technician paused at the door and looked back at her. The call was logged as non-critical. They said, Villani have a survival window of several hours under suboptimal atmospheric conditions. They have children, Jihei replied, her voice harder than she intended. Children who almost stop breathing while you follow protocol. The technician's expression did not change. Complaints can be filed with the collective administration, they said. Response times are calculated based on species-specific survival data and resource allocation priorities. Then they left, and the door closed behind them. And Jihei stood in the middle of an alien apartment feeling a cold anger settle into her bones. This was how the galaxy worked: calculations and priorities and survival. Data small species left to wait while larger ones received immediate attention and somewhere in a database. 7 Villani lives had been weighed and measured and found not important enough to save. Quickly Suli made a soft sound against her chest, and Jihei looked down at the child, whose life now glowed steady and strong. She thought about the word they had called a warm, safe mother, and she thought about how many others across the galaxy had no one to answer their midnight knock. Jihei could not sleep after she finally returned to her own apartment. She lay in bed with the morning light creeping through her curtains and stared at the ceiling while her mind refused to quiet down. The anger had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, settling into her chest like a weight that would not lift. She kept thinking about the technician's face, the complete lack of concern in their voice when they explained that response times were calculated based on resource allocation priorities, as if lives were just numbers in a formula, as if some species simply mattered less than others. When her alarm went off for work, Jihei turned it off and called in sick for the first time in 3 years. Then she opened her laptop and started searching. The galactic network was vast and confusing, filled with information in dozens of languages and formats that human browsers struggled to translate properly. But Jihei had learned patience during long night shifts, and she had learned persistence from years of advocating for patients who could not advocate for themselves. By noon, she had found what she was looking for: reports and statistics and complaint logs buried in administrative databases that no one seemed to monitor. Stories of delayed responses and ignored emergencies and species deemed too insignificant to warrant urgency. The Villani were not alone. Dozens of minor species living on Earth had experienced similar neglect. A family of Corthony had waited 18 hours for medical assistance after a building fire. A group of VES travelers had been stranded at an orbital station for 3 days when their ship malfunctioned. Because repair crews were busy with larger vessels, children had died, elders had suffered, and every single incident had been logged as resolved without any follow-up or investigation. Saved everything she found to her personal drive. Then she got dressed and went to knock on another door in her building park. Jinho lived on the 3rd floor in an apartment, cluttered with legal textbooks and case files. Was a human rights lawyer who had transitioned to Zenarite's work after first contact. And Jihei had spoken to him exactly twice before in passing conversations about weather and parking. When he opened his door and saw her face, he immediately stepped aside to let her in. Something happened, he said. Not a question. Jia told him everything. The midnight knock, the failing atmosphere, the child who almost died. The technician who did not carry Jinho listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was already reaching for his tablet. I have been collecting cases like this for 2 years, he said, but I have never had a witness willing to go on record. I will go on record, Jihei said. I will tell anyone who will listen. Jinho looked at her with something like respect. Then let me introduce you to someone who can make sure people actually hear. That afternoon, Jihei met Baek Soyeon in a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment. The journalist was younger than Jihei expected, with sharp eyes and a recorder that she placed on the table between them like a challenge. Tell me what happened, Soyeon said, and do not leave anything out. Jihei talked for over an hour. She described the fear in Kethri's voice, the stillness of Suli's body, the warmth that had brought the child back from the edge. She talked about the technician and the response time, and the cold mathematics of galactic bureaucracy. When she finished, Soyeon sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. This is not an isolated incident, the journalist said. I have been investigating the Galactic Collective's emergency response protocols for months, and what you are describing matches patterns I have seen across 3 continents. Then why has nothing been done? Jihei asked. Because no one with direct experience has been willing to speak publicly, Soyeon replied. The minor species are afraid of retaliation, of losing their residency status, of being labeled as troublemakers, and humans who help them usually do so quietly, without making noise. Jihei thought about Kethri and Mothman and Tiny Suli, who had called her warm, safe mother. I am not afraid of making noise, she said. The story went live 3 days later on a news site that specialized in human-alien relations within hours. It had been shared thousands of times across human networks and translated into a dozen alien languages. Comments flooded in from around the world. Other humans who had witnessed similar neglect, other species who had suffered in silence, because they believed no one would care, and among all the voices, a pattern emerged that even Jihei had not expected. Humans were different, not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced than other galactic species, but because when they saw someone in need, they helped. They did not calculate survival windows or resource allocation priorities. They did not weigh the political significance of the species they were saving. They simply acted, driven by something that other civilizations could not quite understand or explain. Kithri came to Jihei's apartment the evening the story was published. The small Villani stood in her doorway with their translator clutched against their chest and their bioluminescence flickering in what Jihei now recognized as emotional distress. I did not expect you to do this, Kethri said. I only asked for help with the air. And now you have started something much larger. Jihei knelt down so she was closer to Kethri's eye level. Are you angry with me? She asked. Kethri was quiet for a long moment. No, they finally said. I am grateful and confused and a little frightened, because in my experience, when small people make noise, Large people make them stop. That is not how it works here, Jihei said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. Mothven wants to speak with you, Kethri said. The whole creche does, and they have something they want to tell you. Jihei followed Kethri back to apartment 4B, back into the warm, humid space that now felt almost familiar. The 6 other Villani were arranged in a semicircle, and Suli sat at the front, their small body glowing stronger than Jihei had ever seen. Mothven spoke first, their whistling voice rendered through the translator in halting phrases. We have communicated with other Villani across your world and beyond. The elder said, we have told them what you did, and they have told others. And now there is a word spreading through our communities that we have never used before. Jihei waited, not sure what to expect. The word is for humans, Mothven continued. It does not translate perfectly, but the closest meaning in your language would be those who hold strangers in the dark. Suli stood up and walked toward Jihei on unsteady legs. The tiny Villani reached out with their appendages and touched Jihei's hand, and their glow pulsed warm against her skin. You held me when I was dark, Suli said through their own small translator. You gave me your warmth when you did not have to. Jihei felt tears threatening again, and this time she did not try to stop them. I could not just let you die, she said. No one should die because they are not important enough to save quickly. Mothven made a sound that the translator did not convert, something between a sigh and a song. That is what makes humans different, the elder said. You believe that all lives matter equally, even when the galaxy tells you otherwise, and you act on that belief, even when it costs you sleep and comfort and peace. Jihei thought about the cold anger that still lived in her chest, thought about the cases Jinho had collected and the story Soyen had written and the thousands of voices now demanding change, and she understood that what had started with a midnight knock had become something much larger than one nurse saving one family. It had become a movement, and she was not going to let it stop. Yoon Jihei heard the knocking at exactly 2:47 in the morning. She knew the time because she had been staring at the glowing numbers on her bedroom clock for the past hour, trying to convince her brain to shut down and let her sleep. The knocking came again, soft and rapid, like tiny fingers drumming against wood in a pattern that seemed almost frantic. Jia groaned and pulled her pillow over her head. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital. Her feet still ached from standing in the emergency room, and she had to be back at work in less than 8 hours. Whoever was at her door could wait until morning, but the knocking did not stop. It grew more insistent, more desperate, and something about the rhythm made Jihai's nurse instincts wake up, even as the rest of her wanted to stay buried under blankets. She threw off her covers and stumbled through her small apartment, not bothering to turn on lights. When she reached the door, she pressed her eye to the peephole and saw nothing but empty hallway. Then the knocking came again, and she realized it was coming from much lower than she had expected. Jaya opened the door. Standing in the hallway, barely reaching her knee in height, was a creature that glowed with soft blue light. The Villani from apartment 4B. Jihai had seen them before, always in passing, always keeping their distance, like most aliens did with humans, and like most humans did with aliens. 3 years had passed since first contact with the Galactic Collective, and Earth now hosted dozens of alien species. But true integration remained a distant dream. Humans and aliens lived in the same buildings, walked the same streets, breathed the same air. Yet they rarely spoke beyond what was necessary. The Villani held a small translation device in their trembling appendages, and when they spoke, the device converted their whistling language into flat mechanical English. Please, the device said. I am Kethri from the dwelling beside yours, and I need help. And no one else will come. Jihei rubbed her eyes and tried to focus. The Villani's bioluminescence flickered erratically, pulsing in patterns that even she could recognize as distress. Their thin bodies swayed as if standing upright required tremendous effort. "What kind of help?" Jihei asked, her voice rough from almost sleep. "My family is dying," Kethri said through the translator. "The machine that makes our air has broken, and the repair people say they cannot come until morning, but morning will be too late, and I do not know what else to do." The words hit Jihei like cold water. She had spent 5 years working in emergency medicine, and she knew the sound of genuine crisis when she heard it. "Did you call emergency services?" she asked, already reaching for her coat hanging by the door. "Yes," Kethri replied. "The human emergency people said they are not trained for Volani bodies." And the Galactic Collective representative said, "Our situation is not critical enough for immediate response." And they told me to wait. Jihei felt something twist in her chest. She had heard stories like this before, whispered among the nurses at the hospital, aliens who died waiting for help that never came, species deemed too small or too unimportant to warrant urgency. The Volani were refugees. She remembered now their original world had become uninhabitable decades ago, and they had scattered across the galaxy, never numerous enough or powerful enough to demand attention from the larger civilizations. "How many in your family?" Jihei asked as she pulled on her shoes. 7, Kethri said. "We are a crash cluster, and we share everything. And if the air stays wrong, we will all stop breathing by sunrise." Jihei grabbed her phone and her small medical kit, the one she kept for emergencies that never seemed to happen in her own building. "Show me," she said. Kethri turned and moved down the hallway with surprising speed for such a small creature. Jihei followed, her bare feet cold against the floor, her mind already running through everything she knew about alien physiology. The answer was not much medical. Schools had only recently begun teaching xenobiology, and most of what humans knew about alien bodies came from trial and error. They reached apartment 4B, and Kethri pressed their appendage against a panel that recognized their biosignature. Door slid open, and Jihei stepped into another world. The apartment had been completely transformed from standard human housing into something that looked like the inside of a living creature. Walls covered in soft moss-like growth pulsed with gentle, light-hanging structures filled the air, creating pathways and platforms at various heights. The humidity wrapped around Jihei like a warm blanket, and the smell was strange but not unpleasant, like rain on growing things in the center of the room, arranged in a nest made of woven material. 6 other Volani lay in various states of distress. The largest one, who Kethri identified as Mothven the eldest, could barely lift their head. Their glow had faded to almost nothing, and their breathing came in short, whistling gasps. The smallest one made Jihai's heart clench. A tiny creature, even smaller than Kethri, lay completely still in the center of the nest. "That is Sulali," Kethri said. "They are the youngest, and they stopped glowing when the bad air started, and I cannot wake them." Jihei knelt beside the nest, careful not to touch anything she did not understand. Her training screamed at her that she was not qualified for this, that she could make things worse, that she should wait for someone who actually knew what they were doing. But there was no one else coming. The Galactic Collective had decided this was not critical. The human emergency services had no training, and 7 beings were suffocating in the apartment next to hers while bureaucrats slept soundly in their beds. "Tell me about your air," Jihei said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "What do you breathe? And what is wrong with it now?" Kethri moved to a device mounted on the wall, a complex machine covered in symbols Jihei could not read. "We breathe a mix of nitrogen and methane with small amounts of other gases," Kethri explained. "The machine keeps the mix correct, but something has gone wrong. And now there is too much carbon dioxide, and it is poisoning us slowly." Carbon dioxide toxicity. That was something Jihei understood. different species. Same basic problem, too much of the wrong gas in the blood. Cells starving for what they needed. Systems shutting down one by one. Can your family survive Earth air for a little while? She asked. K3 tilted their head. A gesture Jihei could not interpret. For a short time, they said, it is not comfortable, but it will not kill us quickly like the bad air will. Jihei stood up and walked to the nearest window. She found the latch, figured out how it worked, and through it open cold night air rushed into the apartment. Mixing with the alien atmosphere, get me fans, she said. Anything that moves air. And open every window you can reach. K3 stared at her for a moment, then began to move. Jihei did not know if her plan would work. She did not know if she was about to save 7 lives or accidentally make everything worse, but she knew she could not stand by and watch her neighbors die while waiting for help that might never arrive. She was a nurse. She had sworn an oath to do no harm and to help whenever she could. Tonight, that oath extended beyond her own species. Tonight, she would find out if human determination could substitute for alien technology. 6 months had passed since the night K3 knocked on Jihei's door. The apartment building where she lived had transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to the woman she used to be. Humans and aliens shared meals. In the common room, children of 5 different species played together in the hallways. The walls displayed art from a dozen worlds, and the air carried the mingled sense of food from cultures spanning the galaxy. Jihei stood at the window of her apartment, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and orange. She was tired, the same bone-deep exhaustion that had defined her life before. But now it felt different. Now it felt earned in a way that mattered. The midnight knock network had grown beyond anything she had imagined. 3 cities had become 30. 30 had become 300 across the planet. Humans had organized themselves into informal webs of mutual aid, ready to respond when official systems failed, and they failed often. The Galactic Collective had not changed its protocols. The bureaucrats still calculated response times based on survival statistics and political significance. But now there was an alternative. Now, when a minor species faced an emergency, they knew there were humans who would come. K3 appeared at her door, as they did most mornings. Now the small Valani had become something like a friend, though Jihei was still learning how friendship worked across species boundaries. There is news, K3 said. From the outer colonies. Jihei turned from the window. What kind of news? A delegation is coming, K3 replied. Representatives from 7 major galactic powers who want to study what humans have created. This was not the first time alien observers had shown interest in Earth's unusual social pattern. Scientists and sociologists from across the galaxy had been arriving for months, puzzled by human behavior that defied their models. How could a species be so successful while also being so apparently irrational? How could they form attachments so easily and give resources so freely to beings who could never repay them? The answers frustrated the researchers because there were no simple explanations. Humans just did these things they always had throughout their history. In every culture and every era, there had been people who helped strangers simply because the strangers needed help. It was not logical, it was not efficient, but it was profoundly, stubbornly human. When do they arrive? Jihei asked. Tomorrow, K3 said. And they have specifically requested to meet with you. Jihei laughed. A short surprise sound. I am just a nurse, she said. I did not start a movement. You answered the door, K3 replied. And sometimes that is how movements begin. The delegation arrived the next day in a vessel that dwarfed the Galactic Collective's administrative transport's representatives from species Jihei had only read about stepped onto Earth soil and looked around with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed superiority. The lead delegate was a Varadi, a species that had dominated galactic politics for centuries. They were enormous, easily 3 times human height, with deep blue skin and eyes that seemed to see through everything. "We have studied your network," the Varadi said, addressing Jihei as if she were a specimen in a research project. "It should not function. The mathematics do not support sustainable resource distribution under your model. And yet it functions." Jihei replied. "Yes," the Varadi agreed, "which suggests our models are incomplete." The delegation spent a week on Earth, observing human-alien interactions, interviewing participants in the Midnight Knock network, trying to understand something that should have been impossible on the final day. The Varadi delegate requested a private meeting with Jihei, sat in the common room of her building, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had come to study. "I have a question," the delegate said, "one that my colleagues consider beneath the dignity of scientific inquiry, but which I believe is central to understanding your species." "Ask it," Jihei said. "Why do you do this?" the Varadi asked. "Why do you help beings who can offer you nothing in return? Why do you risk your own resources and stability for strangers? Why do you care?" Jihei thought about the question. For a long time she thought about the night Kethri had knocked on her door. She thought about Suli's cold body growing warm against her chest. She thought about all the strangers who had become neighbors, all the neighbors who had become family, because we remember. She finally said. The Varadi tilted their massive head. "Remember what it was like to be small," Jihei said. "Every human was helpless once, dependent on others who chose to care for us when we could not care for ourselves. And most of us never forget that feeling." She gestured toward the window, toward the city beyond, toward the planet full of humans who had built something the galaxy did not understand. "We help because someone helped us once," she continued, "and because we know that tomorrow we might be the ones who need help, and we hope that when that day comes, someone will answer our knock." The Varadi was silent for a long moment. "This is not how galactic civilizations operate," they finally said. "No," Jihei agreed. "But it is how humans operate, and maybe that is something the galaxy needs to learn." The delegation departed that evening, carrying data and recordings and questions that would fuel academic debate for years. Jihei did not know if anything would change because of their visit. She did not know if the major powers would reform their systems, or if the minor species would gain better representation, or if the cold mathematics of bureaucracy would ever warm into something more compassionate. But she knew that Earth had become something new in the galaxy, a place where the small and forgotten could find shelter, a place where midnight knocks were answered late that night, after the building had grown quiet and most of its residents had gone to sleep. Jihei heard a familiar sound, soft, rapid knocking at her door. She opened it to find a creature she had never seen before, barely reaching her knee, covered in soft fur, with large, frightened eyes that reflected the hallway light. They held a translator device in trembling paws. "Please," the device said. "I was told there is a human here who helps, and I do not have the right documents. And the station said I cannot stay, and I did not know where else to go." Jihei looked at this stranger on her doorstep. She thought about all the nights she had spent alone in this apartment, telling herself she had nothing left to give. She thought about how wrong she had been. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "Tell me what you need." And somewhere across the stars, in communities and colonies and ships traveling between worlds, a phrase continued to spread, whispered in dozens of languages, translated into forms that humans would never hear. Those who hold strangers in the dark, the ones who answer midnight knocks, humans, the species that refused to let the galaxy forget what compassion meant.